Hello everyone, and welcome to the M.O.W. channel. Today we're diving into one of Austria's most shocking criminal cases, the infamous Fritzl case. A father who locked up his own daughter for 24 years and committed unspeakable acts. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Now, let's begin today's story. The Joseph Fritzl case shook the world in 2008, when a horrifying truth finally came to light in the quiet Austrian town of M.O.W. Fritzl, who had long appeared to be a normal, hard-working family man and businessman, had been living a double life that plunged his peaceful community into darkness. Born on April 9, 1935, in M.O.W., Lower Austria, Fritzl grew up in an abusive and oppressive environment. His father abandoned the family when Joseph was 4, and later died during World War II. He was raised as an only child by his mother, Maria, who regularly subjected him to physical and emotional abuse. Many psychologists believe this background may have played a role in shaping his desire to later create a world he could completely control, a world that eventually became a secret underground prison. There was also a disturbing incident in his family history in 1980. Fritzl's own mother died while being confined in the attic of his house. This hinted that his extreme need for control had been developing for years. Long before he ever built the underground cellar, Fritzl married 17-year-old Rosemary in 1956. And from the outside, they appeared to be a normal, stable family. They had 7 children, 3 sons and 4 daughters, including Elizabeth. Fritzl studied electrical engineering, and worked for major companies like voestalpine. Even after retiring in 1995, he remained financially stable by renting out multiple properties. In the 1970s, he even ran a guest house and campground near Lake Munzee. All of this gave him a spotless reputation, a perfect disguise that kept neighbors, the police, and even his own wife from suspecting anything. But behind this respectable facade, his criminal behavior had begun decades earlier. In 1967, Fritzl broke into the home of a 24-year-old nurse in Linz, threatened her with a knife, and raped her. He was arrested and sentenced to 18 months, serving 12. He was also a suspect in another attempted rape and had a history of indecent exposure. However, Austrian law allowed his rape conviction to be erased after 15 years. This legal loophole became a major failure later, when social services allowed him to adopt some of Elizabeth's children without knowing his past. If his criminal record had remained, authorities would have investigated the household far more closely, and the truth about the cellar might have been discovered years earlier. Instead, systematic failures helped him hide horrific crimes for decades. His abuse of his daughter Elizabeth began in 1977, when she was only 11. It continued for years. At 17, she attempted to run away, but was found by police 3 weeks later and returned home. After that, Fritzl seemed determined to gain total control over her. Between 1981 and 1982, he began using his electrical and construction skills to secretly build a hidden underground cellar beneath their home. While pretending to expand the basement with fake permit requests as cover, he constructed a concealed bunker. Originally about 35 square meters, the space was soundproofed, insulated, and carefully sealed to prevent any noise or smell from escaping. He installed elaborate ventilation systems and designed a heavy 500-kilogram steel door with an electronic lock accessible only by a coded keypad. The door was hidden behind a shelf, making it virtually impossible to detect. This level of planning shows that his crimes were not impulsive, they were calculated, deliberate, and years in the making. Elizabeth's imprisonment began on August 28, 1984. At the time, she was 18 and preparing to start a new job as a waitress in Linz. Fritzl tricked her into helping him move a cellar door, then overpowered her using a cloth soaked in ether. When she woke up, she found herself locked in the underground bunker. To cover up her disappearance, Fritzl claimed she had joined a cult. He forced Elizabeth to write letters saying she had left home voluntarily and didn't want to be contacted. He showed these letters to the police and to Rosemary, who believed the story. When 3 of Elizabeth's children suddenly appeared on their doorstep over the years, Fritzl told his wife that Elizabeth had abandoned the babies and mailed instructions to care for them. Rosemary accepted. Fritzl maintained his double life flawlessly. He told his wife he spent hours each day in the basement, working on mechanical drawings. For 12 years, a tenant living on the first floor complained about strange noises coming from below, but Fritzl brushed it off as plumbing issues or heating problems. Every warning sign was dismissed, partly because of Fritzl's manipulation, and partly because of negligence by police and social services. His basement became a hidden chamber of unimaginable cruelty. From the late 1980s to the early 2000s, he continued his crimes in the middle of Austria, protected by anonymity, reputation, and loopholes in the system. His double life was sustained not just by the walls of the underground prison, but also by the social and legal blind spots surrounding him. He used society's trust, his clean public image, and erased criminal record as shields while carrying out long-term abuse against his daughter. The Fritzl case is more than the story of one man's monstrous actions. It is a devastating example of how legal failures, blind trust, and overlooked warning signs can combine to allow unimaginable horrors to continue for decades. Elizabeth Fritzl's life in the basement was, in every sense, a complete separation from the outside world, a living hell in total isolation. After being locked away at age 18 in 1984, she spent the next 24 years in a cramped, dark, damp cellar that constantly smelled of mold. The space was never meant for anyone to live in, and the low ceiling and closed-off structure created extreme physical and psychological pressure. The original room was only about 35 square meters, but as Elizabeth begged for more space and the number of children increased, Fritzl eventually agreed to expand it. Starting in 1993, Elizabeth and her children had to dig through the dirt, by hand for years. Through their exhausting labor, the basement eventually reached about 55 square meters. It was a small change in the grand scheme of things, but for Elizabeth, it was the result of fighting for even the smallest chance of survival. The expanded area included a TV, radio, and VCR, all part of Fritzl's strategy to control how much contact they had with the outside world, giving them just enough information to keep them suspended between hope and despair. Fritzl came downstairs almost every day at minimum 3 times a week, bringing food and basic supplies. Every visit also meant repeated rape and abuse. During her imprisonment, Elizabeth gave birth to 7 children, all of them the result of incest. These children were forced to be born and raised in horrific underground conditions. She delivered every one of them alone, without any medical help. No doctors, no nurses, nothing. She endured the pain, fear, and danger entirely by herself. Of the 7 births, the first pregnancy ended in a miscarriage at 10 weeks in 1986. Then in 1996, one of the twins, Michael, died just 3 days after being born due to breathing problems. Fritzl refused to get medical help, and the newborn didn't survive. He later burned the infant's body, an act that became a key element in his eventual manslaughter charge. The 6 surviving children were divided based on Fritzl's plans. The oldest, Kirsten, born 1988, remained locked in the basement until the case was exposed in 2008. 19 years of captivity. Stefan, born 1990, was trapped for 18 years. The youngest, Felix, born 2002, stayed in the basement, because Fritzl claimed his wife couldn't handle raising another child upstairs. These 3, Kirsten, Stefan, and Felix, had never seen sunlight, fresh air, the sky, or the outside world. Their entire reality was the damp, narrow cellar. The other 3 children, Lisa, Monica, and Alexander, lived completely different lives. Lisa, born in 1992, was found in a box outside the house in May 1993, along with a note supposedly from Elizabeth asking the family to take care of her. Monica, born in 1994, appeared in a stroller at the front door when she was 10 months old. Alexander, born in 1996, was placed upstairs at 15 months. Fritzl told everyone, including his wife, Rosemary, that Elizabeth had joined a cult and abandoned her babies. To make the story more believable, he even recorded Elizabeth's voice and used it to make fake phone calls to his wife, pretending Elizabeth was checking in about the children. Social workers visited the home regularly, but Fritzl's lies were so elaborate that no one questioned the bizarre circumstances surrounding the children's arrival. Once again, Fritzl managed to maintain total control and keep his double life hidden. Life in the basement was full of torment and terror. Fritzl constantly threatened Elizabeth and the underground children, saying that if they tried to escape, he'd flood the room with gas or electrocute them. Investigators later confirmed that these threats were empty but for the victims. Trapped inside, the fear was real and overwhelming. Sometimes he punished them by turning off the lights for long periods or withholding food for days. Their survival depended entirely on his whims. Despite everything, Elizabeth never stopped fighting for her children. She taught them to read and write, giving them as much of an education as she could. The TV and radio became their only window to the outside world, and she used them to help her children develop mentally and emotionally inside the darkness. All of this took place behind heavy 500-kilogram and 300-kilogram doors, secured with electronic codes. A prison of steel and concrete that hid 24 years of unimaginable suffering. The horrifying truth about the basement, hidden for 24 years, began to unravel dramatically when one of the children's lives was put at risk. On April 19, 2008, Elizabeth's eldest daughter, 19-year-old Kirsten, lost consciousness and fell into critical condition. She was suffering from severe kidney failure, which even triggered seizures. This was the inevitable result of the filthy, enclosed basement and the complete lack of medical care. Faced with the possibility that his daughter might die, Fritzl reluctantly agreed to let Kirsten receive treatment. During this process, Elizabeth helped move her daughter out of the basement. A brief but historic moment, as it was the first time she had seen the outside world in 24 years. But Fritzl immediately sent her back to the basement, where she endured one final week of humiliation. Fritzl transported Kirsten by ambulance to the local hospital, Amstetten Landesklinikum. Upon arrival, he presented the attending physician, Albert Reiter, with a note he claimed was written by Kirsten's mother. He lied, saying the child had been abandoned after joining a cult. Fritzl claimed the note requested that her mother provide the girl's medical history. The medical staff, however, immediately noticed serious inconsistencies. It was impossible to explain why a 19-year-old in such critical condition, malnourished and sick, had no one aware of her medical history. Given Kirsten's life-threatening state, the hospital staff had no choice but to notify the police. On April 21, this report prompted the reopening of the investigation into Elizabeth's disappearance. The police quickly appealed to the public, asking anyone who might have information about Elizabeth and Kirsten's medical history to come forward. The appeal spread rapidly across news outlets and newspapers nationwide, putting immense pressure on Fritzl. He continued repeating the lie that Elizabeth had joined a cult, and even presented a recent letter supposedly written in January 2008. But investigators noticed that the letter's content was unnatural, and Fritzl's story about Elizabeth's disappearance didn't add up. Even cult expert Manfred Wolpfart questioned whether the organization Fritzl described actually existed, and noted that Elizabeth's letters had been dictated or written under duress. Trapped, Fritzl could no longer maintain his lies. Elizabeth finally pleaded with him to take Kirsten to the hospital herself, signaling the beginning of his collapse under pressure. Finally, on April 26, Fritzl released Elizabeth and her two sons, Stefan and Felix, from the basement and brought them upstairs. He then accompanied Elizabeth to the hospital. Police, having received a tip that the Fritzls were at the hospital, detained them immediately, taking them to the station for questioning. At first, Elizabeth refused to speak out of extreme fear and anxiety over her father. She insisted she would only talk if the police promised she would never have to see him again. The authorities agreed, and only then did Elizabeth recount over the course of 2 hours the harrowing story of 24 years of imprisonment, sexual abuse, rape, and being forced to reenact pornography in front of her children. Her testimony shocked and horrified the investigators. 73-year-old Fritzl was immediately arrested on multiple counts of serious crimes against his daughter. On the night of April 27, Elizabeth, her 6 children, and her wife Rosemary were moved to a secure facility, completely cut off from the outside world, where they began receiving medical and psychological care. Police obtained information from Fritzl about secret passages in the basement. He revealed how a small, hidden door, accessible only with a keyless code, led into the rooms. When investigators and forensic teams examined the underground prison, they were confronted with shocking reality. The basement was cramped, unsanitary, mold-filled, and it was almost unimaginable that humans had lived there for 24 years. On April 29, DNA results confirmed the worst. Fritzl was the biological father of all of Elizabeth's children. This provided scientific proof of incest, rape, and unlawful confinement. On November 13, authorities officially filed charges against Fritzl, including manslaughter for Michael's death, along with rape, incest, abduction, unlawful imprisonment, and slavery. This marked the formal beginning of the legal process, setting the stage for one of the most infamous trials of the century. Joseph Fritzl's historic trial began on March 16, 2009, in St. Pölten, Austria, presided over by Judge Andrea Humer. Though the trial lasted only 4 days, it drew intense global media attention, with reporters flocking from all over. Austria's court system uses a jury, and 8 jurors were selected to decide Fritzl's fate. On the first day, Fritzl attempted to hide his face behind a blue folder, as allowed under Austrian law, creating an unusual sight amid the flashes of cameras inside and outside the courtroom. After giving his initial statements and asking that all journalists and spectators leave, he finally lowered the folder and stood before the court. Fritzl's initial strategy was very calculated. Out of the 6 charges the prosecution brought, he admitted only to rape, incest, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment, likely a defense tactic to reduce his sentence. However, he denied the most serious charges, the manslaughter of his infant son, Michael, and the enslavement charges involving threats with gas to Elizabeth and the children. His lawyer, Rudolf Meyer, urged the jury to remain objective, appealing to their sense of humanity by pointing out that Fritzl had even brought a Christmas tree to the basement prisoners during the holidays. The defense attempted to frame Fritzl not simply as a sexual predator, but as a controlling father, downplaying the extreme cruelty of his actions. On the other side, lead prosecutor Christiane Borkhauser pushed for a life sentence in a facility for the criminally insane. Her approach was dramatic and sensory. She marked a height of 174 centimeters on the courtroom door to visually show the jurors the low ceiling of the basement, highlighting the constant physical strain victims endured. She even passed around a box containing moldy items taken from the basement so jurors could smell the foul, suffocating conditions firsthand. This visceral presentation drove home the point that the basement wasn't just a prison, it was a place of slavery. The strongest evidence in the trial came from Elizabeth herself. On the first day, the jurors watched an 11-hour videotaped testimony from July 2008, in which she recounted in excruciating detail her 24 years of imprisonment, sexual abuse, rape, and being forced to reenact pornography in front of her children. The testimony was so intense and emotionally devastating that the jurors reportedly couldn't watch more than 2 hours at a time. Elizabeth did not attend the trial in person because of fear of seeing her father, but this video allowed her voice to be heard in court. Additional testimony came from Elizabeth's brother, Harold, who described being physically abused by Fritzl as a child, highlighting the father's violent tendencies within the household. Fritzl's wife, Rosemary, and the children raised upstairs refused to testify, reflecting the complex and traumatic family dynamics. The turning point came on the second day, March 18. Elizabeth had planned not to attend, but she was present in disguise to prepare for a book about her experiences. Though she tried to remain unnoticed, Fritzl's lawyer, Meyer, confirmed that Fritzl realized she was in the courtroom, and he turned pale, visibly shaken. This confrontation reportedly caused Fritzl to reconsider his stance. The following day, Fritzl approached the judge and reversed his position, fully admitting to all charges, including manslaughter and the enslavement and threat charges. This complete confession sped up the trial dramatically, and the jury deliberated for only a few hours. On March 19, 2009, after the 4-day trial, Fritzl was unanimously convicted on all counts. Judge Humer sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole, one of the heaviest penalties allowed under Austrian law. Fritzl accepted the sentence and immediately waived his right to appeal. Elizabeth and her family finally had justice, and Fritzl was transferred to a secure facility for the criminally insane at a former monastery in Upper Austria. In the aftermath, Austrian Chancellor Alfred Gusenbauer announced plans for a government-led campaign to improve Austria's international image. In response to the horrific case, the trial stood not only as a reckoning for one man's monstrous crimes, but also as a reminder of the seriousness of the judicial system and the societal responsibility to protect the vulnerable. After Joseph Fritzl was sentenced to life in prison, a long and difficult journey of recovery began for Elizabeth, her 6 children, and her wife, Rosemary. They were completely isolated from the outside world and admitted to a regional hospital in Austria, where they received comprehensive medical and psychological care. Although Judge Humer noted during the trial that the family was relatively healthy, the trauma left by 24 years in the basement was unimaginable. The 3 children who had been confined in the basement, Kirsten, Stefan, and Felix, had spent years in near darkness, and it took a long time for them to adjust to natural light. The psychological impact was severe. Stefan, who stood 173 centimeters tall, had spent so much time in a basement with a ceiling only 168 centimeters high that he initially couldn't walk properly and experienced extreme anxiety and panic attacks. Even with small changes, like lights turning on or doors closing, to support their recovery, the family's anonymity was strictly protected. They were given new identities, and the media was completely blocked from access. Elizabeth and the children received intensive care from a team of medical professionals and counselors. For the children, who had never seen sunlight, the world was unfamiliar and frightening. They had to learn education and social skills from scratch. Elizabeth provided stability for her children and devoted herself to her own psychological healing. Over time, she also had to rebuild her relationship with her mother, Rosemary. Elizabeth initially pushed her mother away in anger over her inability to protect her during childhood, but gradually their relationship improved. In May 2008, Elizabeth and her children created posters at the treatment facility and displayed them in Amstetten to thank the local community for their support, a small but hopeful sign of their connection to the outside world. By July, all of Elizabeth's children attended a summer camp organized by local firefighters, enjoying swimming and outdoor activities while slowly reconnecting with society. By March 2010, foreign media reported that Elizabeth and her children had recovered remarkably well. Elizabeth was driving, enjoying her life, and maintaining a relationship with her bodyguard, Thomas Wagner. The children developed normal sibling relationships, and the 3 children who had been raised upstairs, Lisa, Monica, and Alexander began to recognize and accept Elizabeth as their mother. While ongoing psychological support was still necessary, the family continued to work steadily to overcome the trauma. Meanwhile, Fritzl remained a subject of controversy even in prison. He was held in a secure facility for criminally insane offenders at a former monastery in Upper Austria, which required stricter control and psychiatric care than a normal prison. In 2017, it was reported that he may have changed his name to Joseph Meyerhofer after other inmates used his infamous identity to create fake dating profiles, suggesting he was still trying to hide his identity even behind bars. In 2019, British journalist Mark Perry recalled interviewing Fritzl, who reportedly showed no remorse for his crimes and even said he wanted others to look into someone else's basement. This indicates that his pathological need for control and antisocial tendencies remained unchanged. One of the biggest legal debates surrounding Fritzl was whether he could be transferred to a regular prison. Under Austrian law, someone in a facility for mentally ill criminals can be moved to a standard prison if deemed no longer a threat. In September 2021, a psychiatric report suggested Fritzl could be transferred, but this was overturned on appeal. In January 2024, Fritzl requested release to a nursing facility due to dementia, but this was also denied. A key legal decision came on January 25, 2024, when the High Regional Court approved his transfer to a regular prison. In May, the court rejected the prosecution's challenge and confirmed the transfer. In a regular prison, Fritzl would have been eligible for parole after serving the first 15 years of his life sentence in 2023. However, given his convictions for enslavement and murder, the likelihood of release remains extremely low, and debates about his future continue. As for the house where the crimes occurred, the basement was completely filled with concrete in 2013, and in 2016, the property was sold to a real estate agent. The plan was to convert the building into apartments, an effort to erase the horrific memories and signal a fresh start for the community. The city of Amstetten was deeply scarred by the case, and both local authorities and citizens continue working to overcome the shadow it left behind. Globally, the case raised awareness about child abuse and incest within families and prompted a re-evaluation of social welfare systems and their vulnerabilities. That's it for today's story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Tomorrow, we'll return with a new case and more mysteries. Thank you for watching.